that if we go with it on that.
And that's going to be a big thing coming up here in a couple of weeks.
I know. That's why.
Wearing blue.
Most of those vehicles that we're going to talk about.
It is 4 o'clock. It is Tuesday, August 1st, 2023. We are Carmel-by-the-Sea City Council. Nova, could we get a roll call, please?
Yes. Councilmember Barron?
Here.
Councilmember Dramoff? Here. Councilmember Ferlito? Here. Mayor Pro Tem Richards?
Here.
Mayor Potter?
Here.
All are present.
Chip, would you lead us in the pledge?
Hand over heart. Ready, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
A little more upbeat next time. All right, this is an opportunity for any member of the public to speak on an item that is not on tonight's agenda. There's a 3-minute limitation on that testimony. If you'd state your name for the record, I'd appreciate it. Welcome.
Hello, Mayor Potter and council members. Michael McWalters, Scenic Road. I came across an article about the residents in a Pittsfield, Massachusetts neighborhood called Shacktown, and they're suing Verizon because they got really sick from the wireless antenna radiation coming from the Verizon cell tower in their neighborhood. And of course, Verizon refused to turn it off. And it reminded me of a recent presentation by senior planner Marnie Waffle when she described the demographics of our 1 square mile village. And out of our population of 3,220 residents, 1/4 of our residents, or 805 of our neighbors, struggle every month to pay their bills. And another 25%, or another 805 of our neighbors, have difficulty every month paying their bills. So that's 50% of our neighbors in Carmel-by-the-Sea, 1,610 residents who struggle or have difficulty making ends meet every single month, which is why the upcoming wireless ordinance cannot have any gaps or any wiggle room that allows the wireless companies to install any radiation-emitting 5G antennas in our residential neighborhoods. Why is this so important? Because up to 30% of our neighbors have electromagnetic sensitivity to wireless antenna radiation. And in these two demographics that are financially struggling, the 30% of them who have electromagnetic sensitivity to wireless antenna radiation, that number is 483. So 483 of our neighbors get radiation sickness from the 5G antennas. And their sicknesses include vertigo, tinnitus, cognitive impairment, headache, sleep disruption, anxiety, depression, disorientation, early onset, Alzheimer's disease, and immunosuppression. We do not kick people when they're down. We do not want our neighbors who are struggling financially to also have to struggle with any of these illnesses. It's therefore incumbent upon us to use every Supreme Court, every Ninth Circuit Court, and every U.S. Appeals Court decision and the general authority section of the 96 Telecom Act in our wireless ordinance to bulletproof the wireless ordinance so we can maximize our authority and maximize our control over the placement of wireless antennas and wireless antenna cell towers so we can protect the most vulnerable among us. And the Planning Commission has the list of these court decisions. In an historic decision on August the 24th, 21, U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit judged in favor of Environmental Health Trust and against the FCC, saying the Federal Communications Commission failed to respond to record evidence that exposure to radio frequency radiation at levels below the FCC's current limits cause negative health effects. We cannot rely on the FCC or the wireless companies to protect us from radiation sickness. We must protect ourselves. We must protect ourselves by using these court decisions in our wireless ordinance. We are currently radiation free in our residential neighborhoods. We want to keep it that way. And the way we do this is by installing fiber optic. It's actually better than 5G, and it's cleaner, and it doesn't have any radiation. Thank you,
Michael. I appreciate your testimony. Is there anybody else wishing to speak tonight? Is there anybody in the room wishing to speak? If you do, don't hesitate to come forward.
Go Bears.
Good afternoon, Council. Melanie Billig. I'd just like to thank Chip and staff for a wonderful appointment of a city forester. He's knowledgeable about our area and about our community, the forest, and it's very, very welcome. I think that this hiring is especially important right now because the council and staff are looking at the forest management plan and reviewing it in depth. And it's important for us to have someone who's knowledgeable about the forest to participate in that. The master plan is very critical for our unique forest. And this is a very special amenity to this community, and it needs to be protected. We hope that the council and staff will direct the steering committee that's looking at helping with the management plan, that they have a significant number of meetings with the community to inform the community about what they're thinking about, what they're doing, but also to facilitate a better understanding of this whole process. And also, I would also request that there be a survey done in the community so that the staff will understand how the community feels and also be able to inform the community. So I thank you very much for that, and especially for hiring such a knowledgeable, outstanding person to help us in all of our efforts with the forest. Thank you.
Thank you, Melanie. Is there anybody else in the room wishing to speak tonight? Let's see, we'll go out to the Zoom world. Is there anybody out in Zoom land wishing to speak tonight?
Yes, I do.
All righty.
Okay.
Yep, the floor is yours.
All right. This is Joe Todd. I want to say hello to the council and to the city manager. I trust that you all had a chance to participate with the Bach, our wonderful music event that happens in July. I really am a little late in doing this, but I wanted to thank you for the post office lobby hours have been extended. They're not extended to the full that we had in the past, but at least it's better than what we had. And the other thing that one thing that you said, I think you said, Chip, that the Residents Association would, I guess it was in the Friday newsletter, the Resident Association would inform the residents here in Carmel, but all the residents are not members of the Residents Association, so we have to find another way to let residents know what's going on. And one of the things that I wanted to comment on is that the farmers market, which is really doing a wonderful thing where they ask their vendors not to park on Mission the third Thursday when we have the market, so as to Mission between 5th and 6th. That will allow the businesses and the restaurants there to have spaces, and also for the people that are going to the farmers market, they will have spaces to park. They're only there for maybe 20 minutes, which is great, and then the businesses are very appreciative of that. So thank you very much, and I think I made that request with the post office last March of 22, so finally something did happen as far as the lobby hours. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Is there anybody else Zooming wishing to speak? I don't see anybody. No, do you see anybody?
There are no hands raised on Zoom.
All right, I'll close the public comment period, then bring it back to council. Next item is announcements. Chip, do you have anything to announce?
I do have a couple of things, Mr. Mayor. Thank you. I wanted to thank you to Ms. Billig. Actually, we had our kickoff meeting for the forest management plan, I think 3 weeks ago tomorrow at Vista Lobos, but there will be a survey that's being sent out. The subcommittee's tuning up the questions right now, so that is a survey about the future of the village. Just a reminder that next Wednesday, the 9th, the Planning Commission will be reviewing the plans for Ulrica Plaza, which is the vacant site at the southwest corner of 5th and Dolores. I think it's in its third rendition, and there is a 3D model that is on the website. The plans have been up for several months, but the 3D model, which is a fly-through of the property, is on the website as well for you to take a look at. Another reminder that 3 weeks from tomorrow, the 23rd of August, the Planning Commission will be reviewing the draft wireless telecommunications facilities ordinance. That'll be a recommendation to the council. So again, that's coming up real quickly. And then one final reminder that the the amendments that the council approved to our timeshare ordinance, this is our short-term rental timeshare ordinance, go to the Coastal Commission next Thursday, the 10th of August in Oxnard. So Mr. Pierik and Mr. Swanson and I will be poised to potentially go to that hearing in Oxnard if need be. And then just one word of thanks. I want to thank Chief Watkins for literally, dare I say, the hundreds of hours that he's put in working with FEMA on trying to get reimbursement for the extra work that we put in during the January through March atmospheric rivers. And you think that going to the Planning Commission is a maniacal process. Dealing with the federal government, I don't want to be disparaging, but it's a real back and forth, providing more documents, providing geolocating locations, the number of cubic yards of asphalt that we brought in, where it went to, if it's still in place, hours. And then in the end, we find out that we didn't meet the minimum $3,800 threshold to submit a FEMA claim. I wish they had told us at the beginning of that process, but thank you, Chief, for the work that you've done trying to get back as much money as we spent, or a portion of that we spent, again, responding to that those natural disasters January through March. So thank you. And that's what I have, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Chip.
Mm-hmm.
City Attorney.
Yes, we had some closed sessions yesterday afternoon. There's no reportable action from them, other than I will point out that the city attorney evaluation has been continued over and will be held at the end of the meeting tonight.
Thank you. Councilors, anything to report?
No.
All right. Okay, that'll move us on then to consent calendar. There's 7 items on the consent calendar. Any member of council wish to pull an item?
I'd like to pull item number 5, please.
All right.
Yes, I'd like to pull item number 4.
Number 5 and number 4. Okay, is there anybody in the public wishing to pull an item or speak to an item? I don't see anybody in Zoom world concerned?
I'd also say 5.
Okay. 5 and 4. All right. All right, we'll bring it back to council for actions then on 1, 2, 3, 6, and 7. Motion.
Move approval, 1, 3, 6, and 7.
Second?
1, 2, 3.
1, 2, 3.
Oh, excuse me.
Okay, we have a motion with a second. Is there any other discussion? No, could we have a roll call?
Councilmember Barron?
Yes.
Councilmember Dramoff?
Yes.
Councilmember Ferlito?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Richards?
Yes.
Mayor Potter?
Aye.
Motion carries.
All right, speaking to number 4, then we'll go in chronological order. Karen?
Yes, I just wanted to say that this is a very important thing that's been a long time coming. We have a tank in the Mission Trail Nature Preserve and an old well, and also an abandoned power pole. Now, that may not seem very important to a lot of you, but it is an attractive nuisance in the park. And I really commend our staff for working through all of the regulatory hurdles that it has taken to get to the point where we are going to be able to actually remove this. So I'm delighted that we are going to let this contract today. And when the time comes, I would be happy to move approval of that.
All right. Is there any other discussion? Is there anybody in the public wishing to speak to this item? I don't see anybody. I would just comment, Bob, I did appreciate your rather long and drawn-out statement of why it took so long to get this thing moving. It was very accurate, very frustrating. I can understand the concerns that Karen was just alluding to. So thank you for your efforts. Welcome back, by the way. Good to see you up and around. All right, so we have a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Do you have any other discussion? Let's move item number 4 then separately. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Barron?
Yes.
Councilmember Dramoff?
Yes.
Councilmember Ferlito?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Richards?
Yes.
Mayor Potter?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Item number 5 is a resolution authorizing the city administrator to execute an agreement with the Monterey County Convention and Visitors Bureau for destination marketing for the years July 1, 2023 through June 30th, 2024, in the amount not to exceed $284,000. Yeah, $30. Is there any discussion?
I'd just like to say that I think we as a community and a council need to ask questions and have a discussion whether we are over-marketing Carmel-by-the-Sea, and also are we marketing correctly. We keep trying to bring in high net worth individuals, and yet then we complain when they buy second, third, and fourth homes and leave them vacant. I'd also like us to do a mid-year review on the funding for Visit Carmel, the Chamber, and the Monterey County Convention and Visitors Bureau.
With that comment noted, is there anybody else wishing to speak to this item?
Good evening, everybody. Other council members, nice to see you here. This concerns me because it is a pattern, as we know each year, a certain amount of money is set aside in your budget. But I have difficulty getting around the idea that we really have people who don't know where Carmel is. And in fact, some of the council members here I've heard say, when I travel, they all know where Carmel-by-the-Sea is. So that's why I'm a little bit complicated, why we're trying to spend more money, taxpayers' money, to do that. So let's discuss it a little bit more at some point before we jump in and do that tonight. I appreciate that very much as a member of the community. Thank you.
Thank you, appreciate it. Is there anybody else wishing to speak to this item? I bring it back to council for action. Council members? I'll move the item. I'll make a motion.
I'll make a motion that we move forward with consent agenda item number 5, resolution
2023078.
I'll second it.
The motion is second. Do we have any other discussion? Seeing none, Nova, could we have a roll call, please?
Councilmember Barron?
Yes.
Councilmember Dramoff?
No.
Councilmember Ferlito?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Richards?
Yes.
Mayor Potter?
Aye.
Motion carries 4-1.
All right, that brings us on then to orders of business. We have 2 orders tonight before us. One is the 6th cycle draft of the housing element, 2023-2031 update. Marnie?
Well, good evening, Mayor and members of the City Council. So we're back before you this afternoon with a revised draft of our housing element for you to take a look at before we submit it off to the state for our first review. So by way of a little bit of background, our timeline to date, back in October of 2022, the mayor appointed a housing ad hoc committee. We had our first community meeting in November. In the following February of 2023, we commissioned a report in partnership with Echo Northwest to do a housing feasibility study. We also, the ad hoc committee hosted a community meeting in February. More meetings with the community followed in April and May, and in June, as you may recall, we had a joint meeting of the council and the planning commission to review the public review draft. In July, we came back before you to get some policy direction on some of our programs. We went back, we made some revisions to the document, made sure that we captured all of the public comment, and we are presenting to you this evening the draft housing element. So again, we've been collecting feedback from the community since November to inform this document. We released a 10-question survey in May of 2023. The survey was offered both in English and in Spanish. We are pleasantly surprised that we got 157 survey responses. That's a really good response rate. And those responses can be found in Appendix H of the draft document. We also hosted a booth in June at the farmers market to talk to folks about the housing element update and what our some of our programs and plans were for the next 8 years. The staff hand-delivered surveys to approximately 25 businesses downtown. We posted flyers throughout the village in various locations just to encourage more participation with the surveys, and we think that it really worked. We also included a link in multiple Friday letters, and as we've been talking about, we have a dedicated project website for the housing element update with the ability to submit comments, and the community did take advantage of that option, which was great. So the culmination of all the comments are in a public comment report. It's just under 70 pages, and it's included as attachment 3 to the staff report this evening. It's also posted on our website. And all of those comments will be going to the state with our draft document for review as well. So staff has prepared an updated reader's guide. You may recall that we prepared one of these for the public review draft, just to give readers an overview of the document and an opportunity to focus in on certain topics or chapters that may have been most interesting to them. So we've updated this guide based on the changes. So this is a summary of the changes that were made between the public review draft and then the draft that we're presenting here this evening. That is also included in your staff report. It's also online if folks want to take a look at that. So kind of an overview, there were some format revisions that I wanted to highlight for you. Chapter 3, which was our housing needs and constraints, was eliminated. And instead, all the information is contained in Appendix B. We just found that there was some redundancy there, adding length to the document that wasn't necessary. Same with Chapter 4, the sites inventory. We eliminated that chapter, and again, all the information is contained in Appendix C for that chapter. And then Chapter 5, we just turned that into an appendix instead of a chapter. So now we just have Chapters 1 and 2, and then a series of appendices. Some of the more substantive content additions and revisions include Chapter 2, which is really an important piece of the document. That's our goals, policies, and programs. We also made some revisions to Appendix C, which is our identification of potential future housing sites. We added in Appendix G, which was previously Chapter 5, and then we also added in our stakeholder survey results in Appendix H. So with respect to Chapter 2, we are adding maps throughout this chapter. Right now, there are placeholders in the current draft. We did get some maps earlier today, so those will be incorporated before we send the document off to the state. We also refined some of our timeframes for program completion. We added program 1.3.D, which is the overnight visitor accommodations, and this is the hospitality employee housing program. Previously, it was embedded in a program with accessory dwelling units, and we thought it important enough to really separate it out and have it be its own program. We also added a program for procedures for SB 35, which is a state requirement. Also added a program to implement state law with regards to SB 10. So one of the policy directions that we got from the council in July was to go ahead and use SB 10 on 3 of our sites, which are zoned for single family. And that is the Red Cross, American Legion, and First Church of Christ Scientist. So we added that in as an implementing program. We've removed a program regarding residential inspection services. We simply just don't have the capacity or resources to provide that service, so it has been taken out. We've also added a program to eliminate unnecessary use permit requirements, and then also a program dedicated to our housing priority overlay district, which we added some components to and made it a little bit more robust. So here's just a sampling of a couple of the maps that will be included throughout Chapter 2. The map on the left is of all of our hospitality sites, which ties into that, the program for on-site hospitality housing, as well as transfer of development rights. The middle map is our sites inventory, so this identifies the locations of potential future housing sites. There's been some refinements to that map. And then the one on the right just shows the zoning of each of those parcels. So I'm not going to go through this in great detail, but this kind of breaks down by year which housing element program, like what our timeframes are. So we have a very robust sort of work plan over the next number of years to implement these programs. And you can see a lot of it is front-loaded in year 2024. And here just the programs that we added. Again, I'm not going to go through them in great detail unless there was a significant change from the public review draft. But again, this is the dedicated hospitality employee housing program, our checklist and procedures for SB 35, implementing SB 10 on those 3 residential sites, eliminating unnecessary use permits. And if you're wondering what some of these might be, the code currently requires use permits for certain housing densities, for underground parking, things of that nature. So we're looking to really streamline the entitlement process and remove any kind of unnecessary additional permitting requirements. And then our housing priority overlay. So we did make some refinements to this since the public review draft. And it's sort of a repository for all the information that a developer would need to build affordable housing within this overlay district. So it'll speak to our water policy that we're going to develop, any kind of parking reductions or waivers, fee reductions or waivers, minimum densities, and the like. So with respect to Appendix C, our vacant and available sites, again, this is our potential future housing sites analysis. Since you last saw the document, we did remove 10 sites and we added 3 new sites. This PowerPoint is going to be available on our website, so there are some slides after the very end which list these out if you're interested. I wasn't going to go through them in detail, but they are listed in the presentation if you're curious. We added 3 new sites, which I did list here: Sunset Center South, the AT&T building, and the Forest Cottages specific plan. The total number of sites was reduced from 35 to 28. So we still have an adequate plan to meet our regional housing need of 349 units with a 15% buffer. Already mentioned the designation of the 3 sites for SB 10. Some other refinements we made was adding names to locations for additional description, just to make it clear the sites that we're referring to. We reduced our projections for hospitality employee housing from 46 to 31, so we really wanted just to be have some realistic projections, and it's unlikely that every single hotel would implement an employee housing unit over the next 8 years, so we're being a little bit more conservative in projecting 31. We also reduced our projections for accessory dwelling units, and then we added a projection for the transfer of development rights with respect to hotels. So all those changes in total, we still meet our RENA. This is just some highlights of the tables where some of these changes have been made. And again, there's going to be a summary at the very end of the PowerPoint with some additional information. Some of the sites that we added names to, locations sometimes, there could be multiple businesses at one location. So we just tried to make it clear, which site and what portion of the site we were referring to. So going forward, our plan is to submit this draft document to the state this week. This will start our 90-day review period, which will go through the end of October. During that time, we've already started working on the environmental review for the document, so we'll keep moving forward with that. In November, we'll respond to any comments that we get from the state and submit a revised draft. And we're still hopeful that by December, we can at least have a letter from HCD that says our housing element is in substantial compliance, even if there are just some minor modifications that still need to be made. There is that 120-day grace period. So even if we don't have a certified housing element by December, we still have an additional 120 days to wrap it up. And we're really confident that we have a solid draft that we're submitting to the state. So we just say stay involved, keep participating. If you haven't already, sign up for the email listserv, visit our website. Any additional comments or thoughts or ideas are always welcome. And that concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Marnie. I appreciate it. Are there any questions of council members? I don't see any. Marnie, well, very well done. Okay, we'll take it out to the public. It's an opportunity for any member of the public to comment on this item. If you'd state your name for the record, I'd appreciate it. 3-minute limitation on that testimony. Welcome.
Good evening. I'm David O'Neill, and I'm speaking on behalf of a number of residents who've been reviewing this and getting together to discuss it. The one thing they're concerned about is the ADU ordinance. It's something that has been we've been meaning to get it out for some time without an ETA, and we're very concerned about that. In developing these ADUs, we need to make sure that there is public input on what they're going to look like, that the final design is in conjunction with the home, with whose land they're on, and that it should also follow the design guidelines. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Is there anybody else wishing to speak? Anybody that's in the room here wishing to speak tonight? Don't be shy.
Thank you, Dave. Regarding ADUs, over the last year we were supposed to have our ADU ordinance, but quite frankly the planning staff has been so overwhelmed with projects that it's been difficult to get it done. And I agree with the previous speaker that this is extremely important, so that the large number of these applications have a tremendous impact potentially on the residential area. And I don't think I have to spell that out for you. You're all, painfully aware of that. And I think what's most important to everyone is the criteria that are being used and what will be developed in the ordinance, so that the implementation of the ordinance and the building of these ADUs is something that's more consistent with our residential values. And there's a protection for our residential neighborhoods, and that people can feel rest assured that we're not going to have a destruction or diminution of the quality of life in our neighborhoods. This is, I think, critical for everybody to understand. And the most important thing is the planning department being able to have the time to finish this. It was supposed to have been finished last December. We're coming up on this December, and we're not really aware of how this is coming along. But of course, the housing element has taken a lot of time and precedence, and definitely with this coming to a submission to the state, hopefully there's going to be sufficient time for Brandon and staff to catch their breath and get this wrapped up before December. I mean, getting something done is critical for us. So I would just urge that the council support the need for getting this completed, so that planning staff can actually plan with the idea that these ADUs will at least bear some resemblance to what we want in our community. Thank you.
Thank you, Melanie. Is there anybody else wishing to speak in the room here tonight? I don't see anybody. Go open it up then to the Zoom world. Nancy Toomey, you have your hand up, followed by Neil Cruz, I believe. So Nancy, your floor is yours.
Yes. First, thank you, Council, and to the team preparing this housing element. It's been a remarkable feat, and kudos to the full team from Marnie and Catherine and consultants and Brandon, et cetera. It's exceptional work. and unfortunately mandated that we need to move forward on, and we understand that and support it. But speaking on behalf of the Carmel Residents Association Board, we fully concur with some of the comments that were previously made, so I'll be extremely brief. Architecture is obviously a fundamental contributor to the village charm and character. Accordingly, we should encourage any pre-approved or standardized ADU plans be in alignment with design guidelines, design standards, and be a part of a public review process as they go through the build out and request and code, et cetera, alignment with the planning department. So it's essential, again, that we maintain a tight alignment with look and feel and charm that has been historically a part of our village, and we want to keep it that way. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nancy. Thank you for your participation too. Neil?
Yes, thank you, Mayor and City Council. I am observing, and it is particularly around the housing act that we've been dealing with here, that I've seen this. So much of our staff and so much of the time of our city government is being taken up now with state issues and other issues like the climate action plan. Our staff has done a wonderful job with this. I've been so impressed, from setting up a website. Marnie has really kept this straight for so many of us to understand it. It's a terrific job. So I'm really loving what the staff has done, and I appreciate their work. But what I'm not liking is that more and more our city council seems to be administering the state guidelines and other guidelines, environmental, things that come down from Agenda 21, and pushing those on the residents of Carmel. And the residents of Carmel are now largely taking a defensive role rather than us coming to the council and saying, this is what we want. More and more, we're coming to the council and saying, why are you doing this? This isn't our first priority. We don't want to do this. And yet our staff time is being consumed with getting those regulations sorted out. You know, in the climate action plan, for example, one of the notes, this is on the city website, increase staff resources to increase staff time for implementation of the strategy. So more and more of our staff and our city government is being used to sort these international regulations. Some of them do come from the United Nations, the environmental regulations, and so on and so forth, and less time for the residents to talk about how they want their village to be. I would like to see more of an education so that the residents understand these outside forces and how much they're taking up the time of our city council. And I would also like to once again finish with asking everybody to support. We have 3 council members that came out in support of local control. I really think as a city and as a body of residents, we need to look at this together and say, why is so much of the time of our city council now about passing regulations that the residents have to conform to instead of the residents voicing what they need and want in their own village? Thank you.
Thank you, Neil. Is there anybody else Zooming who wants to talk tonight? I don't see anybody. No?
I don't see any other hands raised.
All right, close the Zoom part. Anybody in the room wishing to speak tonight? All right, we'll close the public comment period, bring it back to council for action. Council members. I guess I'll kick it off by saying, Marnie, I'm really impressed, honestly. You've done a great job. It's very impressive. The redacted version, the red line version, was incredibly detailed. Anything that can do it can reduce unnecessary, eliminate unnecessary and redundancy in local government's a good thing in my mind. The more we can do than that, the better off we'll be. So I appreciate that. Any other comments?
Yes. This has been a very challenging exercise that we are going through, and our staff has risen to the occasion over and over. From the very beginning, the ad hoc committee met, and we were a bit daunted by it all, but staff in their steady way has really made it, I would have to say, somewhat of an enjoyable process as we have continued to learn new things even as of this week. And I understand that the community is concerned about certain things that come down from the state. But when you look at this one, we have not built any affordable housing in this town without this mandate. And it's time that we do that and we rebuild our community through this process, hopefully. We give people who've worked in this town for years and years and years perhaps an opportunity to actually live here. We look at a changing America, which is sometimes smaller households, sometimes female-led households. It's very difficult to find rentals in Carmel that are affordable for these people that help us keep our village beautiful, keep our hotels clean, keep our restaurants served, keep our stores well clerked during the week. So I am delighted to move approval of sending this on to HCD as soon as tomorrow.
We have a second. We could have a second. We frame the rest of the discussion around a motion.
Oh, could I make a comment?
Well, we can motion. We can take the to presence. We can do three more discussions after the motion. So do we have a second?
Oh, I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion with additional discussion.
Sure, I'll go ahead. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Our community is divided over this issue, and there is significant opposition. It's by no means unanimous. Just read the public comments at the end of the report that came from the city website. This plan represents a loss of local control and a capitulation to the state. The local control we lose will never come back. Next time, the state could ask for 3,000 units and in the entire removal of single-family R1 zoning homes, so it's all multifamily housing, densified and urbanized. We have fought to preserve our character for over a century, and this plan chips away at it. I'm voting no on this affordable housing plan to represent the voices of our residents who are against it because it's not right for Carmel and for those who want to maintain local control over these decisions and not have them made by Sacramento bureaucrats who don't live or know what's best for our community. It's unrealistic to think that densifying our downtown, adding manufactured homes, objective design standards, and a vacancy tax, and pre-approved cookie-cutter ADUs in Carmel will solve the state's housing issues. Housing is expensive, and it needs to be built where the land is available and more affordable. People and families need actual houses, not tiny, undignified 250 square foot pack 'em and stack 'em box units. This is wrong for Carmel.
Can I just...
Hold on. There'll be no, if you like something, thumbs up. If you don't, thumbs down, okay? But no outbursts, please. Thank you. All right, go ahead.
Well, I don't know if I should amend this or not. Are you saying that we shouldn't put a plan forward?
I think that we should have fought this, and I still continue to think that
no,
we
but
should
that's
fight
not.
this.
Should we not put a plan forward?
I think that this plan is wrong for Carmel. I think we as local elected officials should decide on our own and do things such as with the Carmel Foundation.
All three of us agree with you, but what I'm saying is, do you want us to put a plan forward?
I do not support the plan. I'm sorry.
So, okay.
Okay, we're clear. Okay, any other discussion? Jeff?
Thank you. Yeah, I think this is a good document that will serve the community well moving forward. I do think that there are a number of people in the community that are concerned about the availability of housing and do believe that that our community, our 1 square mile, should do its part. So I would like to thank Bobby and Karen for all the work that the both of you put in to make this happen, and staff, especially Marnie, for all the work that you did in putting together these many hundreds of pages, and the community members that came out and spoke.
Thank you, Jeff. Anybody else? Bobby?
I would just like to say it was a pleasure working with Marnie, Catherine, and Brandon. I think it was a great job that you guys did. This was a difficult task. I know that it's not a popular task that we had to go through, but I think it would have been very irresponsible and illogical for us not to turn in a document that would get us where we need to go. So I want to appreciate what you guys have done, and I want to thank all of the residents that came forward with ideas, and the amount of reading that some of the residents did here to produce this document, the best that we could for the city of Carmel with little disruption to our zoning, laws, codes, ordinances. I think they did a fantastic job, and I think that we as a community came together on this. We turned in a good document. We're going to do the best that we can to keep the integrity of our village the same as it is, And so I want to say it was a pleasure working with you guys, and thank you the residents.
All right, we have a motion, we have a second. I just comment briefly that I want to thank you guys for sitting there and taking the heat. I mean, honestly, it wasn't easy, but I appreciate that. But on the other hand, I'm not real thrilled about the fact we're being told by the state what to do. I think we do have a mandate from the public to go ahead and better engage with the state, and I'm going to make a commitment to do that. I may have an announcement next meeting about how we're going to go ahead and be able to reach out to the local electeds better, at the state level. There's a growing divide at the state level. I'm on the state board for the California League of Cities, and there is growing unrest there that the measures that are coming out of Sacramento these days are not appropriate for this community, and not just Carmel, but other communities. So I think we'll see opposition to Senate bills and Assembly bills that are coming forward. I gave Alessandra yesterday, I gave you a list of 2 bills that we're actively opposing at the state level. Very aggressive mandates that take away the ability for local government to control the land use decisions that they should be making. So with that said, we have a motion, we have a second. Nova, could you call a roll?
Sure. Councilmember Barron?
Yes.
Councilmember Dramoff?
No.
Councilmember Ferlito?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Richard?
Yes.
Mayor Potter?
Aye.
Motion carries 4-1.
All right, stay tuned. All right, now we'll move on then to the next item, which is our last order of business, which is receive a report on the non-compliant outdoor seating and amenities at restaurants and wine tasting space shops that are still remain after the COVID-19 proclamation of a local emergency was rescinded, and provide direction to staff on how it should be addressed. Okay. Where Brandon is handling this, or Marty, who's here?
He's
Yep,
going to
Mr. Mayor, I'm here. I'm joining you virtually tonight.
Your mail. I forgot.
Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Good evening, Mayor, Council. I apologize for not being there with you in person tonight. As you mentioned, we're talking about the remaining non-compliant outdoor seating and other amenities for restaurants and wine tasting shops. Just a little background here to understand how we got where we are. If you recall, in March 2020, there was a little thing called the COVID pandemic. The city had a proclamation of local emergency, which allowed for special rules to be administered by the city administrator to protect the health and safety of the community. We all remember that the parklets came out of that, as well as additional private outdoor seating. So this is seating we're talking about tonight specifically on private property, not the parklets. This applied to both restaurants and wine tasting shops. Then 3 years passed, and in March of this year, the proclamation was repealed. By that point in time, the parklets were already gone, but we did still have quite a bit of additional outdoor seating on private property. So when those special rules went away upon repeal of the proclamation, those additional outdoor seats and all of the amenities became non-compliant basically immediately. So if you recall at that March City Council meeting, you gave direction for us to hold off on code enforcement until December of this year, and returned to you with a survey that just sort of laid out the scope of how much seating was out there, who all was able to take advantage of the extra seating, and use that as a way to talk about next steps. So tonight we're seeking direction, and I'm going to try to break up the presentation tonight over and over again into 3 buckets: restaurants, wine tasting shops, and then those amenities, things like heaters, speakers, outdoor lights, and signage. And the reason I'm doing that is because they all have different rules and are different places in our regulatory framework. So go through really quickly the survey results for you. We surveyed a total of 79 businesses. This included our restaurants, our wine tasting shops, markets, coffee shops, and bakeries. Of those, 56 had some outdoor seating. That's roughly 70%. Nearly all of them had more than were allowed by permit. As you know, in town, we have a large swing of the number of outdoor seats, anywhere from 2 to 80. When we counted them all up, we did a physical count of every outdoor seat that exists. We're at approximately 1,300 seats. We went back through our records, 433 seats were recorded with permits. But I would like to note that I think that number, that 433, is low. There were some use permits that are old that were not immediately be able to be found. And I think there was some that were hiding in other use permits, like, for example, the plaza, all the seats for those restaurants are hidden underneath a bigger permit. So I think it's much more than that, but for certain, there's more seats out there than are allowed. So just keep that in mind. Of the 45 restaurants, only 11 didn't even have a permit for any outdoor seating. So the bulk of them have seating permits for the outdoors. So we're assuming that it's really about people taking more advantage or using more space than they're supposed to. Of the 15 wine shops, 11 had outdoor seating. And again, wine shops, as we'll talk about later, aren't allowed to have any in our code right now. For the wine shops specifically, the outdoor seating ranged from 2 to 15 with an average of about 7.5 seats. And the total number of seats counted for outdoor wine tasting was approximately 84, with none allowed. Go through really quickly here because these aren't the main event, but I still want to keep you poised on them. The amenities, just some rough numbers, 29 of the total numbers, total businesses visited had outdoor heaters, many of which had some sort of violation of the building code, too close to a building, and those are a constant battle for us. We're constantly having to get those moved. Of the ones we visited, 18 had some sort of unpermitted or non-compliant lighting. Lighting is permissible, but it has to be done in a very specific way per our design guidelines. Signage was another one that's gotten a lot better, but we still deal with that one. When we went out that day, there were still 9 that had non-compliant signage. Again, signage is allowed, it just has to be done the right way. And lastly, of the visited sites, 18 of them had unpermitted sound equipment. And the thing to note here is that outdoor speakers are not permissible at all. So our code does not allow those. So 3 of these 4 outdoor amenities are allowed. They just have to be done the correct way. 1 of the 4 is not allowed at all. So now we'll get into some considerations, and what these are for are things for you to keep in mind while you're deliberating tonight. So I'm going to go through same way here, break it down by restaurants, wine tasting shops, and amenities for you. So here's some considerations relevant to restaurants. And the reason I'm doing this is because they are all very different, as I mentioned. So restaurants are currently allowed to conduct business outside of a completely enclosed building. And that's the term straight out of our zoning code. There's only 10 uses that are allowed to conduct business outside of a completely enclosed building, and restaurants are one of them. But the number and location of that seating is controlled by a use permit, so it's not a free-for-all. So currently, as the code is written right now, without any amendments, any restaurant could apply for a use permit. Any restaurant with private outdoor space could apply for a use permit to add or increase the number of outdoor seating that they have. So we don't have to amend our code for that to happen. But the approval is not guaranteed. It would require a planning commission hearing and for the planning commission to make certain findings, including things, exploring things and deliberating on things like accessibility, visibility from the right of way. Are there any easements? How is it going to impact structures near to it, both residential and commercial? So there's a whole process because it is a use permit. It is also very important to note that water is not typically a factor when it comes to additional outdoor seating for restaurants. This rule has been in place since prior to the pandemic. It's Rule 24, and you can see the specific rule section down there. But effectively what it says is you can have half over again what you have inside. So if you have 100 indoor seats in your restaurant, you can put 50 more outside without any additional water for a total of 150 seats. That's the rule that existed prior to the pandemic, and it, for all intents and purposes, is going to continue. We've heard nothing about that changing. So that was your restaurants. Considerations for wine tasting shops. And again, this is important because it's very different than restaurants. The first thing here to note is that wine tasting shops are currently not allowed to conduct business outside of a completely enclosed building. Again, straight out of our zoning code, they are not one of the uses that's allowed to conduct business outside. The city also has an adopted wine tasting policy, which provides some more regulatory language for us to think about. You can see here, I've taken these directly out of the policy. 2 things I'd like to highlight is that the wine tasting shops should avoid the appearance of a bar. Only 30% of the total floor area of a wine tasting shop is supposed to be used for tasting, with the rest really supposed to be for retail. This is a part of the policy that's already stretched quite a bit. If you go on and look at some of the websites, you might see that quite a bit more than 30% of the space is used up as a bar, some with actual bars built in. And then the second one, the primary purpose is really to encourage people to buy and take away. They should not operate as a wine bar where the primary purpose is to consume on site. So those are just some things to keep in mind about the policy that the City Council adopted in 2015. In order, if the City Council was inclined to go down this path, it would require multiple code amendments. Conservatively, it's about 12 months because not only are we updating that wine policy that I just talked about, because certainly those two parts would be inconsistent, but we'd also have to amend that section of the municipal code, which would then facilitate updating the local coastal program, requiring a trip to the Coastal Commission. It's unlikely that we're going to need to update the general plan if we went this route because we're just dealing with private property. All of the general plan sections we talked about when the parklets were in play had to do with how public property was used. So it's unlikely, but I haven't been able to completely rule it out yet. Another thing to consider, a variance is not a possibility here. Variances are only permissible or grantable for a handful of items. And those are more land use or land-based, like land conformity based. Think about, setbacks and height variations and things like that. And it's all another thing to consider is the city's cautious history with the regulation of alcohol. The planning department did produce a white paper some time back that was sent out. It was included with your staff report as an attachment. It just goes through the history of alcohol consumption and regulation within the city. And then the last bucket of our three, I'm sticking with this 3-bucket theme here for you. Our last bucket of the 3 has to do with those outdoor amenities. During those 3 years, leniency was granted for these additional amenities because they were serving extra guests during the pandemic. It just was a function of how it was working. For the temporary heaters, like I said, they don't require a permit, but they do have to be placed and maintained the right way. We do have repeat violations, and we work with people. We don't mess around with safety, so it's a safety violation. We take care of it right away. But we have been a little bit more lenient on those when it's not a safety issue. Outdoor lighting, once again, can be permitted with a design study to make sure that it conforms with all of our design guidelines. Outdoor signs, again, may be permitted, but has to be in compliance with our sign ordinance. In most cases, only one sign is allowed. There's some exceptions. More strict enforcement obviously creates a fair advertising environment for everyone. So those first 3, again, are the ones that are currently allowed in our code, but they just have to be done the correct way. The last one here are the broadcasting speakers, which are not permitted outdoors for any uses that we're talking about tonight. And that's per the city's health and safety code. That's not the county health and safety code. That's the city's health and safety code. You see reference there. If the city council were inclined to allow people to keep speakers outside, it would require amending the zoning code and the local coastal program, similar to the wine tasting shops. The last thing for you to consider in this consideration section of the presentation are some of the public comments that we've received, and I've tried to capture them the best I can. I'm sure you'll hear from more members of the public tonight, but as you know, we always try to tell every part of the story for you. So we did get a comment that the city council should consider granting a variance for wine tasting shops. As I mentioned earlier, that's not something that's allowed. There's only 5 things that are covered, and those are development standards. Like I mentioned, setbacks, height, things like that. There was a comment that 1 outdoor wine tasting permit was already granted by the city. That is true in part. There was a use permit, a broader use permit that was approved by the Planning Commission back in 2018. It did include on the plans 4 seats, an outdoor patio. The use permit itself wasn't specifically just for outdoor seating. It's worth noting that at the time in 2004, the zoning code prohibition on outdoor wine tasting was still in place. I was unable to find any findings or reason why that was approved, but it is true that that use permit that was granted had plans showing 4 seats outside at a wine tasting shop. There was a comment that no code enforcement violations have been brought up for wine tasting related to the seating outdoors and the nuisances, and that's true. We've only had signage related actual notices of violation and code enforcement actions. Comment received about State Alcohol Board, ABC, already allows outdoor wine tasting, so we should think about following those rules. That is true that the ABC does allow and regulate outdoor seating, but the city is well within its right to create additional rules or even straight out prohibit it if the city so wishes. There was a request for the creation of an outdoor wine tasting ad hoc committee and an assertion that that was promised. I could not find a point in time when the council previously agreed or promised to establish that. That would be up to the council, of course, to decide where that would fall among the other priorities of things that we're working on right now as a city. And then the last comment was that it's unfair not to allow wine tasting to continue for a grace period like we're talking about for the restaurants who can apply for a use permit. And as I mentioned earlier, the major difference here is that restaurants have a permit path right now to get approved. Restaurants are allowed to operate outside where wine tasting shops are not. So that brings us to the direction, which once again, keeping with a theme, I'll break into 3 buckets for you here. So the first area we're looking for direction tonight is with restaurants. The direction that we need is if someone is intending to apply for a use permit to keep the additional outdoor seating they have, should they get to keep that seating while they're still in process? If yes, then how long do they have to submit that complete application before they have to make the seating go away? If no, should we make them take the seating away tomorrow, or how long should they have, even if they're going to do no? If they don't intend to apply, how soon should all that unpermitted seating go away? Our suggestion here is that you should allow restaurants to temporarily keep their additional outdoor seating that they intend to apply for. That would, of course, be contingent on submission of a complete use permit application, which includes the fees, by December 31st, 2023, which is the date the council set when we last met on this for the end of the grace period. Failure to submit an application complete by that time would then mean that the following day, all the outdoor seating that was not permitted would have to go away. For those restaurants choosing not to apply for the additional seating, to keep it fair among the other restaurants, all of that unpermitted outdoor seating would be removed by the same date, December 31st, 2023, or another date as directed by council. So that last suggestion, obviously that's staff. The next bucket of direction that we need has to do with wine tasting shops. So the question is, the big question is, should the city embark right now on amending regulations for wine tasting shops to be able to operate outdoors? As I mentioned, that's a zoning code amendment, a local coastal program amendment, and updating the city's wine tasting policy. So if the answer is yes, where should this effort fall in the list of other city council strategic priorities? It's important to note, as I've mentioned a couple of times, that outdoor wine tasting would remain unpermitted until those new regulations are in place, like not even allowed by the code. So they would have to cease operations pretty soon unless the council opted to adopt an interim ordinance. So although if the city council said no, they don't want to embark on amending regulations right now, then we would want some direction on how soon to make the wine tasting shops remove their outdoor seating. So the staff suggestion is to not undertake a regulatory update right now due to the high volume of other initiatives we have in process. I mean, you've heard about some of them tonight. Housing element, design traditions, wireless ordinance, forest management plan. We want to get to the ADU ordinance too, believe me, we're excited about that one as well, but there's just a lot cooking right now. And our suggestion on the timing is that all unpermitted outdoor tasting then be removed by December 31st, choosing the same date as the restaurant so that there's at least some equity there, or as another date directed by council. Then the last bucket for direction has to do with those amenities that I talked about. So the big question is, should strict enforcement of those amenities begin immediately? And the 3 that I'm talking about right now are the ones that are allowed, but have to be done a very specific way. So the heaters, the lighting, and the signage. If no, how long of a grace period should we grant them? Should it run as long as they're December, how long they're allowed to keep their seating, or what? How long should that go? And then the next question has to do with speakers. It's similar to the question about the wine tasting shops. Should the city update the municipal code to allow for outdoor speakers? And if yes, where should this effort fall in the list of priorities? Again, noting that if the city council does want to allow for outdoor speakers in the zoning code, then there would have to be some sort of urgency ordinance put in place in order for them to stay while that work was in process. Here, the staff suggestion is similar before. We would want to begin strict enforcement of those non-compliant amenities immediately. We feel like it's time, so that would be corrective action within 5 days. None of these are big lifts to get done quickly. And then with respect to the regulatory updates for the speakers, we would again suggest not doing that right now, just again, due to all of the volume of the other initiatives in place. So I know that was a lot. I'm available for questions, and just as a reminder, sort of the format of this, we've got 3 buckets, so we're looking for direction on restaurants, wine tasting shops, and those outdoor amenities. Thank you.
Thank you, Brandon. Are there any questions to Brandon by council members at this time? I don't see anybody. All right, we'll open it up to the public then. It's an opportunity for any member of the public to speak on this item. 3-minute limitation on that testimony. Come forward, state your name for the record. I'd appreciate it. Do the room first, and then we'll go out to Zoom land. Welcome.
Mayor, City Council members, staff. My name's Jeffrey Blair. I own Blair Estate Wines out of the plaza in Carmel. I'm a non-compliant outdoor seating wine tasting room. I go back a little ways in this town. When I first opened up my tasting room, the big concern of the city residents and the Planning Commission and Council was that we tasting rooms were going to provide a drunken party for everybody on weekends and weekdays. We've done well. We've proven we do not do that. As far as my being out of compliance because the city of Carmel would have to go through this big undertaking of changing policy, changing ordinances, use permits, etc. There's a simpler solution. Put us where we belong. We belong with bars and restaurants. We do not belong with stores. We do not get people drunk. I don't make any money pouring my tastings, believe it or not. My money is made when they walk out the door with the wine in their hand. Outdoor seating is attractive all over this country to people who want to taste wine. The young gentleman who just gave the thing alluded to the fact that the reason that wine tastings can't have outdoor seating has to do with the historical idea in this town that would lead to drunkenness and rowdiness and alcohol problems. What's the difference between a bar serving hard liquor and me serving a 1 ounce pour of my Pinot, a 1 ounce pour of my Pinot Gris, and if you haven't tasted it, come on by, guys, it's good. My 1 ounce pour of rosé. What's the difference between a restaurant serving a beer with a taco or me serving a taste of wine of, say, 5 different 1 ounce pours with a breadstick? Absolutely nothing. We all do the same thing, and yet I'm a store? That makes no sense to me. I think somebody needs to look for the city, and again, thank you for giving me the outdoor seating during COVID. Without it, I wouldn't be standing here today. I would be sitting on the street somewhere with a can because it saved our butts, and I do really appreciate that and stuff. But, you know, we need to look at, we pay a lot of sales tax. We pay every year my business permit license fee goes up, which I'm glad because I'm making more money. But put us where we belong. Put us with the restaurants and the bars. We are an integral part of this town. People come to town to do wine tasting. We're becoming known as a local spot. I know the one entity that he talks about that had a use permit granted with 4 outdoor seats. Well, are we going to remove them? No, they have a use permit. How'd they get a use permit with 4 outdoor seats when I can't get a use permit? And yes, I'm the bad one. I have 16 seats. They fit. I would like to ask one more thing. If we do go forward on this, which I pray that we do it on a case-by-case basis. Look at my site, where it sits, how it enhances the plaza, how it enhances the characteristics of this town. It's not seen from the street. It's not a pretty spot right now. Am I running out of time?
Yes, you're out.
Okay, it's not a pretty spot, but you give me outdoor seating and I'll make Carmel proud of what I put up. It will be classy.
Thank you.
Look at my tasting room. It's not a dump.
Appreciate your testimony. Thank you. Next speaker. Next speaker. Is anybody else wishing to speak in here tonight?
Hi, everyone. My name is Kristen Rideout. I'm the owner of Toro Sushi on Dolores Street. I was here at the March meeting where this was kind of first brought up, and I greatly appreciate the leeway that you gave us for going to December. Thank you for that. Since then, I met Brandon at that meeting, and he's been great. He gave me his phone number, and he was at my restaurant, I think the next day or 2 days later, trying to help me with everything. I had submitted my use permit application probably that next week, and since then, it's 5 months later, and I'm still working on it with Evan and with Brandon, and they've been very helpful. But it is a long process. It sounds like you went through the same thing with the state, sending in things, getting things back, sending them in back, et cetera. So, we're working on it. It is taking quite a bit of time. I know the heaters and the lights and everything have also been brought up into consideration with this time period through December. But I just would ask if we could still kind of have those things at least until we're getting these things approved or not approved. I understand that that could happen too. But we are trying, if we didn't have our heaters and our lights, no one will sit outside, and that's kind of that. So it wouldn't make any sense for us to have outdoor seating. But anyways, I appreciate what you're doing, that you're working on it and focusing on it. I appreciate Brandon and Evan's help through this process. It is a long one. It was brought up at the March meeting, how long does this take? And I think they were pretty forthcoming, saying it could take 6 to 9 months, which I'm getting into right now. So that is all that I have to say. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you. Anybody else wishing to speak inside tonight?
Carol Hall. I didn't expect to speak on this topic, and I'm not a drinker, but I am a dog lover, and so I would like to speak for the dogs in the community that can stay with their parents, I guess you'd call us, outside. That's why I like parklets too. Not all the parklets that we had, but many of the parklets that I just think it makes sense for us to be able to eat outside as well, and it's a great environmental positive as well. I also want to say that I agree with everyone that spoke publicly over the last topics tonight, and so of the public. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Carol. Anybody else wishing to speak?
Good evening, everyone. There's two vibes to this whole equation. There's the village vibe, like private property, a little music, a little light, a little heat, a little food, a little dinner. Feels good. Then there's the authoritarian vibe where you say, you can't do it. We're a village. Don't forget about it.
For the record, I think that was Parker Logan. Anybody else wishing to speak?
Hi all, I'm Jack Galante on Galante Family Winery. For the past several years, numerous local wine tasting rooms with private outdoor patio spaces have successfully provided wine tastings to customers with no problems or complaints. To the contrary, our outdoor patios are extremely well received and greatly appreciated by our customers, many of whom still feel much more comfortable in an outdoor setting. In June 21, we formally requested this council work on amending the wine tasting policy zoning code, not only to make it permissible for us to operate on our private patios, but also to conform with the California ABC definition of wine tasting rooms. We're currently classified as retail by the city. However, Section 23770 of the California ABC Act clearly states that wine tasting rooms are classified as non-retail in order to distinguish them from bars, which are classified as retail. Furthermore, we were promised that an ad hoc committee would be established to discuss and evaluate this situation. Wine tasting rooms heavily depend on customers sampling wines to make informed purchases. We strive to create a comfortable and enjoyable learning experience for our patrons. This year, like the rest of Carmel, we've experienced a 20 to 25% decrease in visitor counts in our tasting rooms. Additionally, we're faced with the challenges of recession, rising costs and rents, and the loss in production due to the 2020 fires, which we are just now realizing. Asking us to further reduce the number of tasters we can accommodate and consequently limit the amount of bottled wine sales will undoubtedly lead to a reduction in staff and revenue. Respectfully, I'm again asking that you prioritize this matter, establish the promised ad hoc committee to collaborate with us, and thoroughly evaluate this issue. In the meantime, I kindly request an interim ordinance to allow us to continue operating outdoors on our private patios, which have absolutely no impact on public property. As you are all aware, one winery has already received a permit to operate, and staff is suggesting that restaurants who do not have permitted outdoor spaces be allowed to continue while they apply for their permits. I firmly believe it would be entirely unfair not to extend the same privilege to other tasting rooms with private spaces. As you know, Monterey County has earned the reputation as one of the top 10 wine tasting destinations in the world, and it proudly stands as California's largest grape growing region in the United States. Carmel-by-the-Sea is the jewel of this region and cherishes its vibrant wine community. I kindly ask you recognize and appreciate the immense value we bring. In conclusion, I urge you to take action to support our wine tasting rooms and preserve the legacy of Carmel as a thriving wine destination. Let us work together to find a solution that benefits all parties involved and upholds the essence of our values. Thanks for your time and consideration.
Thank you, Jack. Appreciate it. Well
Thanks.
timed. Is there anybody else wishing to speak in the building tonight? Looks like not, maybe not intending to come up. Is there anybody else in the hall wishing to speak tonight before I go to Zoom? Yes? No? You coming up? Come on.
Mr. Mayor, Council, fellow citizens, my name is Anthony Carnazzo. I own a stationary restaurant, and I'm a resident of Carmel-by-the-Sea as well, with my wife and three children. Three now, up to three. I came here initially mostly in support of outdoor dining for restaurants, but I also wanted to compliment and support the previous speaker as well. I just wrote down a note so I didn't forget to say it. One of the more common questions I get from happy guests leaving my restaurant is, where should we go taste wine? The two kind of go hand in hand. So in general, I want to encourage you in your decision making to err on the side of as many seats as possible. For the reasons previously described, it's just really nice to be outside. Everybody really enjoys that. It's very in line with the character and charm of Carmel. And certainly I understand that you need to adhere to various policies and codes and all the rest. On that point, I would encourage you to look for ways to perhaps amend them, just like Jack was saying. And at the very least, I would like to offer thanks to Brandon and to his staff, and to acknowledge their recommendation that we have all the way up until the very end of the year for this process to take place. As my neighbor from Toro just mentioned, it takes a long, long time, and we're these seats to be pulled sooner than having allowed us the opportunity to go through the process that would be devastating on a number of levels, not just for the business. It's not exactly the best business climate right now, but also for all the people that work for us, all the local vendors that we work with as well. So it's not just such a quick decision. There's auxiliary and myriad impacts that I think are all worthy of consideration. So thank you for your time in considering this matter, and please, as many seats as possible, wherever possible. It makes Carmel a nicer place. Thank you.
Thank you, Anthony. Appreciate the testimony. Is there anybody else in the hall wishing to speak? Last call in the building. I'll go out to Zoom world. Kim Stemler, looks like you have your hand up.
I do, Mayor. Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. I'm the director. I'm Kim Stemler. I'm the director of the Monterey County Vintners and Growers Association. And we are very grateful for your support during COVID-19, especially for allowing parklets and outdoor seating on private property. And that just benefited all of us. Excuse me. We request that outdoor wine tasting be allowed until December 31st, while also beginning the process to modify the respective guidelines for outdoor tasting on private property for wine tasting shops. Brandon and other staff, I'm sorry. We empathize with your challenges and are committed to helping you in any way that you need help. We also really appreciate the continued support and collaboration of the city with the local wine industry. And one of the things I want to talk about with our industry, because I think it's really aligned with the city's values, is that our industry is one of the few excuse me, vertically integrated businesses in the city and the county. That means we grow, we make, we bottle our wine in the county. And in our tasting rooms, we're able to sell our wines directly to consumers. There aren't many other businesses that have that kind of vertical integration. That helps with sustainability efforts. It reduces transportation and emissions. It minimizes waste. And as Karen and I know, we can more easily share innovative practices, as we saw in the biochar launch at Regen last week. It also ensures that there are more tax revenues in the city and in the county, and that jobs stay within our community. We also play a vital role in supporting nonprofit events, as you all know. So why do I bring this up? Because our industry's values are aligned with the city's values, and we're asking for your support. We really believe that allowing wine shops to operate and offer tastings in an outdoor space would enhance not only the guest, but also the dog's experiences. In conclusion, we believe that our local wine industry, as I said, aligns perfectly with your vision and culture, boosting the city's culture, boosting the economy, supports small business, creates jobs, contributes to a thriving community, all good things. And Brandon, I'll be there when you need me. Thank you so much, council and mayor and staff.
Thank you, Kim. Appreciate your testimony. Is there anybody else who wants to speak tonight? I don't see anybody. Nova?
There are no hands raised on Zoom.
All right, I'll close the public comment period, bring it back to council for direction and comments. Anybody make any opening comments? I think what we'll do is work our way through the list of issues. But if you want to make an opening comment or have a question of staff.
Mr. Mayor, there is copies of the presentation at the dais for each of you in paper, so if that serves as a tool to get through the questions, we'd be happy to use that.
Councilor Druthers.
I have a question for staff.
Sure.
Brandon, are the current, like the heaters that you talked about, did you say they were all deemed safe by the fire department?
So the tricky part about those heaters is that we all know they're portable. So when we go by them, if we see one that's in a place it's not supposed to be, then we'll pop our heads in and kindly remind folks to move them out from underneath a roof eave or away from a building or away from plants. But they get moved around, you know, as any good hospitality purveyor will do. When a guest says, "Hey, I'm cold, can you move this heater over here?" They're usually going to respond to that. So the heaters are kind of like a little bit of whack-a-mole in a way. So we try to keep them going as safe as possible, but they provide that potential for risk, you know. It's just part of it.
But the ones that we do sell them are, we say you can place it here.
Yeah.
They are safe.
That's right.
So
yeah, and there's alternatives. So one of the alternatives to the portable ones is if it's more permanent outdoor seating, then there are some restaurants you probably have seen around town that have the built-in ones that are like built on the side of a building or hang from a pergola that don't move. They're certainly much more safer. But those are, I think, when outdoor seating is permanent, that's when you make that investment probably.
Right. Okay, thank you, Brad.
All right, any other questions or comments before I open up? Okay, so what I'll do is I'll go ahead through these items then, one by one. Does that work for you guys? All right. So the first question is, if a restaurant intends to apply for a use permit, should they be allowed to keep their additional unpermitted outdoor seating while they are in the process of obtaining that use permit from the city? So that asks the question basically, do we want to go ahead and allow them to go ahead and apply for a use permit? So I would say I'm prone to saying yes on this.
Yeah, we had, it sounds like we're still on the same page that we were on at the end of March, which was end of the year, you apply for a use permit. You get to keep your stuff if you apply for the use permit. If not, they go away. So I'm in agreement with staff's recommendation. And I would like to thank Kristen for your words and for your application and all that stuff and for being on the ball.
I'm in agreement.
I am too.
Good.
Yes, I am too. I do have concerns about what appears to be excess seating that makes it difficult for people who want to visit other shops that are back in those little courtyards. They feel like they're walking through a restaurant rather than, an open passageway. And one of the things we pride ourselves on in Carmel are our passageways that go through to other streets. So I don't want to see us crowd them up so much that people don't feel comfortable exploring and going through them. And So that's just a comment I'd like to
Can I
make
just say
about.
thank you for bringing that up, Karen, because that was on my notes too. I wanted to say yes, as long as the seating is not interfering with other businesses. So
Yeah,
thanks
I
for bringing
agree
that
with
up.
Good. So we have consensus then, good. And then one of the other question was, if they don't intend to apply for a permit, should they be allowed to continue until the outdoor policy is removed? So do we want to go ahead and if they're not going to do it, do we let them go till December 31st? I don't have a problem with that.
Yeah.
Good, okay.
I support it.
All right, let's move on then to wine tasting. Can we put this slide up? Beautiful. All right, should the city embark on amending regulations for wine tasting shops to operate outdoors? If yes, then that was a pretty simple statement. I'm prone to saying yes.
I would support it.
I'm on the fence. I think that I think that in the short term, we should have our businesses should abide by the rules that we have in place. So I agree with sort of staff's analysis that we should ixnay them before the end of the year. But I think that there's, Kim Stemler brings up, an interesting point that, she said our industry's values are aligned with the city's values. And I think to some extent, that's true. And I think we've had conversations in the past about finding methods, finding sort of tourist attractions that sort of speak to who we are and where we are. And I think it's pretty clear that, we talk about the outdoors a lot, and I think it's clear that wine tasting has some place, in that, and that we might do that. We might consider opening the door a little bit. Staff also brings up the notion that the city has had a sort of a tenuous relationship with alcohol, or a fraught relationship with alcohol in the past, and I'm mindful of that. But I could see, a little bit of an effort to open the door a little bit, at least in private spaces, and especially given what we said before about impediments, the public right in the sort of private right-of-ways and whatnot.
Your comments?
I would be willing to let them stay until December 31st, but I do think that this should have a process that is well thought out, because when wine tasting came into being in this town, it went through a lot of thought process as to what it should be. And one of the things was it seemed that we did not want wine bars. And some of the wine tasting shops have started to resemble wine bars rather than tasting rooms. And I think that there are some definite complicated questions to consider before we do open it up. And I also do not want to see this jump ahead of all the other things we need to finish up at this time. As people have said, we have a lot of ordinances that need to be finished, and this should not jump ahead of those. We've got to finish those up. But I would be willing that they could stay until December 31st, but that it should be a process, not just an opening of the door without a definite discussion.
I think it's Alexandra's.
I support what you said, Karen. That makes sense.
I would like to see us, I think I was on council when we brought in the first wine tasting rooms, and I'm not really sure why it went into retail. Like, Brandon, do you know why it went into retail? Or Chip, do you remember? Or maybe Jack, you remember why it went into retail? Miracle.
I'd rather hear from staff, but okay, go ahead.
Yeah, it's because, we have, Mr. Blair talked about, the correct classification, and we have a limit on the number of bars. We've got a regulatory limit. The number is 3. So there was concern that at that point in time that, again, wine tasting would evolve into wine drinking, and that was a slippery slope in the villages, on the community's behalf when we reviewed that. So it was, again, tried to compartmentalize the use into tasting it. We're having salmon for dinner. Let's taste some wines that are going to go best with it before we purchase a bottle of wine or bottles of wine for dinner. And, again, we have, I think the way we structured it in the agenda report was we've had a very cautious relationship with alcohol so that we did not become a community that, the old language talks about being a honky-tonk, God forbid, dancing and music and alcohol combined. But it's served us well in spite of in spite of our regulatory standards. We still have issues with people coming to our village and being disrespectful, and Chief Watkins can read from the watch commander's log on a regular basis where people come in, not to the wine tasting rooms necessarily, but to our bars. And I'm sure Parker can tell you stories about people, and he does a great job policing his own establishment, but people who come in and are not respectful. And so the answer to your question, sir, is that the community at that point in time was concerned about it being a slippery slope and evolving into something that we did not want, which was wine tasting bars versus tasting rooms.
And if I could add to that too, it's hard. Sorry to jump in from Zoom. It's kind of hard to get the timing right. It's not like jump rope. But if you look at also the wine tasting policy, there was an intentional language, if you read back through that white paper too, of only 30% of the floor space is intended for consuming or tasting wine. The other 70% of the floor space of a wine tasting shop, at least in the policy the way it's written right now, is supposed to be for sale of retail goods. So that was another nod to trying to keep the wine tasting shops as more of a retail operation versus a drinking or eating establishment. There's a specific number put on the percentage of floor space allowed for tasting wine.
Well, I think there's room for a little bit of effort to get something done. There's room for a little effort to make an attempt to get something done by the end of the year. And I don't know what, I'm not crazy about lumping the wine. I'm not crazy about Jack's suggestion about lumping the wineries in with restaurants and all that. And Brandon talks about a white paper and the white paper, and I think maybe we should take a look at that. But I think that there's some room. I would be interested in pursuing that a tiny bit. Maybe there are some modifications to the white paper that we could, look at and think about and talk about and make that would result in, at least a short-term plan, which maybe would cover 2024, and we could give it a try or
So an interim ordinance and perhaps addressing those concerns.
I'm sorry?
An interim ordinance. So
yeah, an interim ordinance, I would say an interim ordinance with an end date. So, have an interim ordinance by the end of 2023 that would have an end date of mid-2025 or something like that. So we would have time then to sort of spend some time with what happens, in 2024 and figure it out and figure out what works and what doesn't work. I have concerns going through my head, and I don't want to bring them up here, but I think we could, I think a couple of us could do that.
I don't think that's fair to staff. Staff is so overwhelmed, and we have so many issues coming up, especially up till the end of the year. I don't think it's fair to leapfrog and put this issue there. And it hasn't been on our strategic plan, and I know we've got a meeting coming up at the end of August. Maybe we can bring it up then and see, what kind of a priority it gets. But right now, I'd say it's not fair to staff to add another thing on their list of things to do.
Yeah, I concur with that comment. Because as you can see here, the staff has said, due to the volume of other initiatives, please do not undertake regulatory updates right now. Housing element design traditions, wireless ordinance, forest management plan, ADU ordinance, et cetera, et cetera. So it's just, I think it would be an undue burden to our staff who
So could we leave it in place?
asked us not to do this right now.
I think what Jeff was suggesting isn't that laborious, really, especially if we string it out as long as he was going to. I like the idea of going ahead and working on an interim ordinance. I don't think it's going to be that complicated to figure out how we can go ahead and get that through. But if it had an end sunset date on it, sort of the actual expiration of the ordinance, that would be good too. Is that what you're suggesting, right, Jeff?
Yeah, I think it would be an interim ordinance with a look towards something permanent, with a look towards something that's a little more. Still a little temporary, but maybe something between temporary and permanent, so we could at least try some out. I think this process, the process of sort of regulating wine tasting rooms is going to take a number of years. And, you know, as I say, when we talk about other stuff, if we don't start, we'll never finish. So I think that there's a little bit of room to sort of dip our feet into the water. And, you know, in terms of, I hear Councilmember Drama's and Councilmember Ferlito's sort of comments about staff, and I take that to heart. My comment would be that, you know, an effort sort of led by, you know, the council or something with sort of an eye towards just modifying the white paper and coming back with, you know, some simple suggestions maybe would be less intensive to staff. I mean, we've got, you know, September, 5 or 6 months. 5 or 6 months, so a slow burn to do that, and I think that that's a possibility. I mean, we can put this discussion off. So, you know, we're at the beginning of August, and we have strategic planning at the end of August, and we could certainly like.
That'd be my request.
Sort of,
if we
sort
can
of take that, and you know, we could each talk to Chip between now and the end of August, and then figure out if this is something we want to make a decision on this at that point.
Yeah, that'd be my suggestion, is that we think about this and you decide on the 30th whether if it needs to be a higher priority, and then specifically whether you want to open up the entire use or make ordinance amendments germane directly or specifically toward outdoor seating, because that's a project that's a lot smaller than amending the entire ordinance or the use classification.
I'll do that research before. I'll do that research before the end of August.
Okay. So yeah, and we can talk about it on the 30th. But I'm grateful for the council members, and you all acknowledge that we have kind of our plates full right now.
Yes, I would like to make one more comment. I'm concerned that I understand the desire to operate outdoors, but I also see many, many, many wine tasting rooms operating back inside completely now, and not operating outdoors. So I think that, you know, this needs a larger airing of this discussion. But I also really do not want to see this become wine bars where somebody can walk in and just order a bottle of wine to drink there, or order one glass after another of just what they want. That's a wine bar versus a wine tasting room. And we're set up right now for wine tasting to showcase the wines of and spark retail purchase of those wines. And I think there's a big, big difference between sitting and drinking several glasses after another and tasting wine. So.
Okay. So I think we got direction there.
Yes, sir. We'll talk about it on the 30th, but this is good food for thought. Thank you, Council.
All right, so then let's go to outdoor amenities. Direction needed. Should strict enforcement of the following agenda item amenities begin immediately? Heaters, lighting, signage, and noise. I would say yes. I mean, really, I don't see any reason why we wouldn't. I'm not saying bar them, just make sure they're compliant with safety, health and safety, and also existing zoning. As far as the amplification noise, I'm not going to support that.
Yeah, I agree with the noise comment, and I think we should get rid of outdoor speakers. I'm surprised that we still have them, and we should ixnay those now. But Brandon, I had a question. Like, you made a comment during the discussion about heaters that you sort of had repeat offenders. Like, what does that mean? Like, you say you can't put a temporary heater in this one spot, and then you come back the next week and there's a temporary heater in that one spot, the same spot again?
That's correct.
Well, why? I mean, it certainly seems like there could be like a one strike policy here. I mean, you can't put a heater, you can't put a heater under a wood overhang, and if you do that, you just have to get rid of all your heaters. Like, that seems like maybe just a more effective use of staff's time, right?
Yeah. And I will say, you know, when we have those, that level of like strict sort of like in your face defiance is pretty rare. It's more like just trying to keep them in a place where they're safe. That doesn't happen very often, but in the rare cases where those do happen, we do use, the tools we have available to us through the notice of violation and citations and fines and things like that. It's a multi-step process that takes work.
And so these things that are listed here that the mayor just talked about, heaters, lighting, and signage, that stuff is all detailed in the use permit for the establishment, right? Like you can have outdoor dining and you can have heaters in this location and that location and the other location, but nowhere else. Is that right? Or does the use permit not specify where they can put heaters and how they can put lighting? I mean, I see Monique in the audience. I see Monique in the audience, and she spoke back in, congratulations, by the way. She spoke back in March about like they were having an issue with outdoor lighting and it wasn't allowed in their use permit or was. So could you clarify like whether that's how that works with the use permit?
Sure. Yeah. So the answer is some are tied to the use permit, some are not. So the patio heaters, some people do call them out on just their site plan that we see with the use permit, but we don't have any design guidelines that the Planning Commission would have to look at for heaters. So those can be placed, the portable ones we placed around. If it's a fixed location one, then we start talking about those in like the building permit and things like that, but not the Planning Commission necessarily. For lighting, it's a little bit different because we do have regulations in our design review that the Planning Commission does for lighting, things about downlit, shielded, the amount of lumens that are allowed to take place. That's sort of like up a level from the heaters. And the signage, the sign actually goes through its own permit process. That's not through the Planning Commission. That's a staff level. Signage is a staff level approval. So they're all a slightly different answer on all of them.
What are signs that are out of compliance? Like what's an example?
So let's say, there's a place that has additional outdoor seating and they wanted to put, a second sign somewhere that, people passing by might now notice, hey, there's some outdoor seating. So technically, some places aren't allowed to have two signs, but because there has been this outdoor seating, letting people know how to get there, it's just kind of been let go. So that would be an example of a non-compliant sign. Obviously, like the A-frame signs that we see out on the sidewalk, those are non-compliant and we get rid of those right away. Those just haven't been tolerated in quite some time. In fact, council gave us direction many months ago to just get rid of those right away. So I'm not talking about those ones. It's more, signs on buildings, signs in windows, things like that.
Okay. Can you give an example of the lighting that is not in compliance?
Sure. The best example I can give you would be, like a bulb, a light that was put on the side of a building to light an outdoor area that wasn't used before, and the bulb is unshielded. It's not downlit. The lumens are too high. It's glaring up into an apartment window up above, something like that. That's an example of non-compliant lighting.
How does it come into compliance?
You have to get the right fixture. So there are fixtures, think of like, some people call them like barn lights or gas station lights, where it's sort of like a hood that focuses the light downward. That is a compliant light fixture as long as the bulb is completely tucked up in that hood and the amount of light, the lumens that it's coming out of that fixture are compliant. So that would be an example of a compliant fixture.
Let me ask you a question. During the pandemic, when I traveled to New York and there were lots of interesting parklets and so on, one thing that became very popular was these USB rechargeable lights that all the light goes down. And they're small and they can be placed on a table so that people can actually read the menu and they don't glare. Would something like that be permissible for lights on individual tables?
It would, yeah. Because I'm certain, I know what you're talking about. Those are definitely not over the amount of lumens that are allowed, and it's shielded. You're not seeing bulbs from the street. So yeah, absolutely.
Okay, because they're very attractive and they actually work quite well.
Okay, so we've got direction on this item then too. Okay, we good? Staff understands?
Yes, sir.
Yeah,
All right.
thank you all very much.
Okay, so let's then curtail the balance of work unless there's something for future agendas we'd like to discuss now. We'll go to closed session.
Yeah, I have a future agenda item.
Okay.
You know, it seems like the discussion of addresses is kind of languished. You know, staff has run up against some roadblocks in terms of their ability to sort of deal with the post office or get answers from the post office. And I would like to ask that the council consider in a nighttime session, not in a strategic planning session, but in a nighttime session where people that work could come talk to us, that we have a discussion about addresses at one of these meetings.
I concur on that. I get a lot of comments, what's happening with addresses? Why aren't we doing anything about it? How did it fall through the cracks? So yes, I agree.
Okay, well, we'll take a look at the calendar, we'll get it on there. Okay, thank you all for your attendance, appreciate it, and we will go to closed session, report out at the next meeting. Yeah,